Good morning and happy Sabbath. I will be reading from John 8:32 through 36 and from the Declaration of Independence. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. They answered him, We are Abraham's descendants, and have never been in bondage to anyone. How can you say you will be made free? Jesus answered them, Most assuredly I say to you, whoever commits sin is a slave of sin, and a slave does not abide in the house forever, but a son abides forever. Therefore, if the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed. And from the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
That's my grandson. Good morning. Happy Sabbath. As usual, I'm ill-prepared and ill-equipped to give a sermon in this place. Nevertheless, God has called me to do this, and so, I would just ask that you would earnestly pray for me. I'm serious. I really need your prayers. Dear Heavenly Father, you know I need you. You know we all need you. Lord, I just pray that this morning that your word would reach each heart, including mine. I pray, Lord, that you would give us a picture of what we can be, of what we are called to do. I pray, Lord, that you would bless our country, that you will use us to reach those who need you so desperately. Lord, we thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. The 4th of July, also called Independence Day, but most people call it the 4th of July. And you know why we celebrate the 4th of July may be unique in the world. Most countries or civilizations celebrate the time when they receive their freedom. They celebrate the time when they are victorious in a conquest. Or in some cases, they remember the start of the conflict. But the 4th of July is unique in that the conflict had already been going on for quite some time. The war had started before the Declaration of Independence, and it went on quite a long while afterwards. And the prospects of winning this war were dim at best. We were a country of 2.5 million people, and we had challenged the greatest power on earth. And even now, as they were gathered together in the hall, there were ships out at sea bringing a mass of troops from England to put down this rebellion. And the Declaration of Independence is far more than just a Declaration of Independence. It is a declaration of dependence upon God, a declaration of faith, a declaration of hope, and it is timeless. And so when we celebrate the 4th of July, we are really celebrating a document that expresses the greatness of the human spirit. Now, there's a lot in the background of the Revolutionary War. I'll give you a little synopsis of the events that led to it. In the 1750s, 1754 to 1763, I believe it was, there was a war in America called the French and Indian War. Now, this war was about a contest between France and England. You see, the colonies, the English colonies, were all along the coast of North America. And the French had a much larger territory to the west of them. Now, the French were mostly engaged in the fur trade, and they had built a whole lot of forts there to secure their territory. And they had made friends with the Indians and were trading with them. And England began to get some fur traders in there of their own, and this caused some friction. And after a while, England noted that the number of people in French colonies were much less than the number of people in the English colonies. And they had an idea that they could take it over, which they eventually did. So they sent troops to America, and they quartered them in the houses of the Americans who lived here. And they pressed many Americans into service in the war. And what happened was that the French, realizing that they were vastly outnumbered, pressed into service the Indians of the nation. Up to that time, the relationship between the Native Americans and the settlers had been mutually cordial for the most part. There were incidents, of course, but nevertheless, there was a kind of an agreement to get along. And this war kind of broke that spirit, because the French brought in a lot of the tribes from the north mostly, and the English brought in a lot of the tribes from the south mostly, the Cherokee and so forth. The French had the Mohicans and the Mohawks and the Iroquois and so forth. And the battles were brutal, and the deportations on the settlers were intense. And so this created a lot of friction between the colonists and Great Britain. After the war, where England won and had that territory then to the west, this conflict in the meantime had escalated to the rest of the world, so that there were fighting between France and England on the continent as well, and other countries also were in that, and it was called the 7 Years' War, but it lasted 9 years here. So the result was that England won the war, but they were broke. They were very much in debt. And so to solve that problem, they came out with what was called the Stamp Act. Now, the Stamp Act was a tax on everything that was made of paper, so that every time they wrote a letter, every time they read a newspaper, every time they played cards, every time they did anything that had the use of paper, they had to pay tax. And this did not seem fair to the Americans, because they had already paid the price, they felt, for this war. And of course, this tax was also very unpopular in England, and eventually it was repealed. But it was replaced by what's called the Townshend Act, which put a tax on a whole lot more things. A lesser amount on each thing, but over a vast number of things. And that also became very unpopular, and there was a lot of resentment, and there was some riots, and there was some harassment of the British public officials who were governing the colonies. And so in response to that, England sent over troops to America and quartered them in the houses of the Patriots, which was not something that they liked very much. Eventually, the Townshend Act was repealed because of the protests and so forth that it caused. But they retained a tax on tea, of all things. Now, most people in those days drank tea. Since that time, America switched to coffee because, they boycotted tea. They boycotted all British products. And they began to bring in tea from other sources, which was smuggling in the eyes of the British. But it was just commerce in the eyes of the Americans. So the British declared a monopoly on tea from the East India Company, which is was actually an arm of the British government, even though it was called a company, and so that they brought in tea. The Patriots turned away a number of ships that were carrying tea, but finally one made it into the harbor of Boston, and on it was 100,000 pounds of tea. And the governor there was determined that that tea was going to be unloaded and that the tax was going to be paid on that tea. And he had troops to back it up. But in the night, a number of patriots dressed up like Indians. They weren't fooling anybody. They dressed up like Indians so that nobody could recognize them. And they put, charcoal on their faces and so forth so that they wouldn't be recognized. They came and they dumped all of that 100,000 pounds of tea into Boston Harbor. You see how things escalate. Some British guy commented that made the tea too weak even for Americans. But in response to that, the British passed the Intolerable Acts. That's what they were called here. They were acts designed to punish America for what they did. And they occupied Boston. And they closed their port and said, you're going to suffer until you pay back the cost of that tea plus the tax. And anyway, that caused a whole lot of resentment. And they did a lot of other things in that intolerable act. They increased the number of troops in the country, and they housed them in people's houses. They would just say, here we are, we're going to live in your house. You can live here too, but you also get to feed us. And of course, that was not very popular. They would raid American homes in the middle of the night and take people prisoner if they thought that they were rebels. They would confiscate their guns and leave them vulnerable to the deportations of the savages, who basically, now had gotten used to raiding American farms and so forth. And so it was an ugly situation, and it became totally intolerable. And then that is the beginning of actual war, because some 15,000 patriots came and surrounded Boston and held the British tightly in there to prevent them, and to express their dissatisfaction with the way things were. Now, the Americans had numerous times expressed their grievances to King George and to his representatives. And all they had received is more reproofs, more restrictions on their liberties. And so, this was a kind of a desperate move to try to gain the attention of the world and of the King of England to their plight. And of course, what happened as a result was that the British began to wage war on Americans. This was about the time that you would find the midnight ride of Paul Revere, because the British had heard, the Americans not only had to contend with the British soldiers, but they also had to contend with what were called loyalists or Tories in their own ranks, because not everybody believed that, that a lot of them held their allegiance to Great Britain. And mostly these were the upper classes, those who were favored, those who had positions in the government, those who, received the benefits of the country. And so there were a lot of spies among them, and someone had told that the Patriots had been sequestering arms and ammunition in Concord and in Lexington. And so the British sent an expedition to Lexington and Concord. At Lexington, they were met by about 75 militia, Minutemen, and they were obviously vastly outnumbered. And the British were inclined to just let them go, but somebody fired a shot, nobody knows who. And they opened fire on the militia, and 10 of them were killed, and the rest disbanded. But then the British moved on to Concord, and there it was a different story. The militia there were in force, and the British soon discovered that they'd have to turn and run they did. And all the while that they were running on back to Boston, the Minutemen were hiding behind trees and rocks and shooting at them. And so this was, an open declaration of war. And as a result, this brought in the massive importation of troops that was happening. At this time, the Second Continental Congress was convened. The First Continental Congress was convened in response to the tea tax and so forth. The second one was in response to this great escalation in hostilities between America and so forth. And at that convention, a proposal was put forth to declare that these United States were free and independent states, and that they were independent of Great Britain. And so on July 2, that resolution was passed. No, that was, I'm sorry, that's the wrong date. I think it was on June 11. And at that time, they appointed 5 individuals to begin the task of laying out the reasons so that the rest of the world could understand and know why it was that we needed to disband ourselves from Great Britain. And so these 5 individuals were chosen. And 3 of them you know very well. Thomas Jefferson, who was actually the junior member of the group. He was a young man, not well politically established at that time, but nevertheless a great orator and a great writer. And so they chose him. They chose Benjamin Franklin, and they chose John Adams, who became our second president. These 3 individuals participated. There were 2 others, Townsend, I believe, and somebody else, but they did not participate in the writing of the Declaration of Independence. In fact, John Adams, the moment they convened, recommended that we leave the task to one individual, and that was Thomas Jefferson. Now, Thomas Jefferson, to my mind, is one of the greatest Americans that ever lived. Now, I know he's been criticized. All of our founding fathers have been sullied recently. I think this is really unfortunate. I have always been amazed at the confluence of great men that happened at this particular time. I mean, you just think of Samuel Adams, you think of Patrick Henry, you think of all of these great men who wrote so eloquently, who had such fervor, who were such amazing individuals. But, it's been said, I think it was Bull Halsey, the Admiral Bull Halsey, who said, there are no great men. There are only great challenges to which ordinary men rise. And so it is. This was a time of a great challenge, and those who were willing to step forward and to take the bridle were actually became great men. They were led by God to do that. And so over the next weeks, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. He then submitted it to John Adams and Benjamin Franklin for editing and correction and other inclusions and so forth, but largely it was a work of Thomas Jefferson. And so this then was submitted to the Continental Congress for acceptance on July 4, 1776. It was an amazing document. Their task had been to lay out the reasons for their separation from England. Nevertheless, the heart of the Declaration of Independence has nothing to do with that. It has something to do with the ideal that this country should be founded on. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Almost everybody knows that phrase, at least they know it when they hear it. They understand that this is the principle that Lincoln referred to when he said 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the principle that all men are created equal. When he referred to the beginning of our country, he referred to 1776. And this is why, even though victory had not been won, victory was assured because it was a victory of the Spirit. It was a victory of the faith that they had in God. Now, I've mentioned that Thomas Jefferson has been vilified because he owned slaves. And yet he wrote, all men are created equal. Probably there's some things that you don't know about Thomas Jefferson. He did own slaves. But his ownership of the slaves did not make them slaves. They were slaves, and they were probably better off being owned by him than by anybody else. He worked actively to end the slave trade. In fact, international slave trade was later abolished under his administration when he became president. But he had proposed in the Virginia legislature to abolish slavery in a gradual, gentle way. Basically, it was a series of laws that would act over a period of 28 years end slavery entirely. But this would be in a gentle way so that the people who were being released into the community could be absorbed naturally and could be trained for independence and freedom. This, unfortunately, was vetoed by King George. Because, all the laws had to pass through King George and receive his approval. And he did not approve that particular law. So it was really unfortunate, because had that passed, Virginia was the most influential of the American colonies, and the rest of the colonies would have eventually followed suit, even though down south there was some resistance to this. Another thing you may not know was that when this document was proposed to Congress, they accepted most of it, but they struck out one particular thing. And that was that Thomas Jefferson had written in there reprobating the British for the slave trade. And unfortunately, in those days, that was politically incorrect. And so that was stricken because South Carolina and Georgia objected to that particular phrase. So when you think of Thomas Jefferson, think of him as a man who was working with what existed at the time and trying to make it better. And I would propose to you that that's all that we can do as well, is that we need to deal with life as it is and work towards making it better. You'll notice another thing that has been criticized about Thomas Jefferson is that many people call him a deist. That is, a deist is someone who does not believe in a personal God. A deist is someone who believes that God set things rolling, but he just became an absentee landlord, and he just lets things go, and he doesn't really care very much about what happens on a day-to-day basis. And this is totally untrue about Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was a committed Christian. And Thomas Jefferson, the reason he was called this is because, there's kind of the opposite extreme, ultra-Calvinism, the idea that God, if somebody steps on my toe, it's because God decreed that they should step on my toe. This whole idea that God does everything is kind of counter to Scripture as well. We need to understand that God gave us freedom. And as a result, so Thomas Jefferson believed in this way, and so some of the Calvinists called him a deist. But that's neither here nor there. But you see in the document how much he relied on God. Endowed by their Creator. He was a creationist. He understood that God was the author of everything good. He appealed to the supreme judge of the world as he made this document. And with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, motivated him to make this great statement. Some of the greatest phrases in here, the end of it, I think, is just amazing and outstanding. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. I want you to know something. Many of them who signed this document lost their lives. Most of them lost their fortunes, but none of them ever lost their sacred honor. And I think that this is an instruction for us. There are a lot of things that are far more important than life. There are a lot of things that are far more important than things. We need to regain that spirit of honor that our patriot fathers had. When I say fathers, when I use the word men here in the text, back then everybody understood that when you said men, you meant mankind. You didn't mean just one gender. That has been confused in our society in recent years to where now you can't even say either one. So it is ludicrous to the extreme. He said that all men are created equal. He meant all persons are created equal. This was a radical concept This was something that the British certainly didn't understand. They had, the nobility and the commoners. They had the king and, everybody else. They had this idea that there was a structure of people. Some people are more valuable than other people. This was the basis of the slavery system in the first place. And Thomas Jefferson and others of the Patriots understood that God created us all equal. This country was based on no king and no pope. That is the basis of our country. Those are the two horns of the beast, the other beast in Revelation that rose from the land. And so they understood this, and they believed that God would see us through. He said it was self-evident, but it is only self-evident to those who have a firm grip on what God says. We still have that within us to categorize people into people of worth and less worth, and we tend to look down on people who don't meet our standards, whether it be political, whether it be social, whether it be intellectual, whether it be whatever. We tend to have this idea of structure in our minds. But God has called us all. The whole idea of independence is really summed up in the idea of individuality. God made each one of us to be individuals. He made us different one from another. It's kind of amazing that he did that. I mean, a lot of the animals look pretty much identical to each other, but people, there's only one person who looks exactly like you. Even if you have an identical twin, there are differences between us, and there are more differences in character and personality than there are in our physiognomy. So we need to understand that God has put us in a unique place, and whether you are recognized by the world as someone great, or whether you are looked upon as someone pretty common, or whether you are even looked upon as someone who is lowly, God has a place for each one of us. God has an ideal that we all together form the image of God. That's what it says in Ephesians 4, is that we together form the image of our Lord and Maker. And this, I think we need to understand, that while we are individuals, we were designed to need each other. So when he was calling for independence, he was not calling for independence from each other. He was not calling for independence from God. He was calling for independence from tyranny, from evil, from the sin that does so easily beset us. He is calling us to a greater idea of who we are and what we can be. And so this whole idea of the human rights that are set forth here are fundamental to our whole understanding of who and what we are and our relationship to God. This document resulted in a continuation of the war that lasted for a good long time afterwards. And many of the people lost everything they had. But they did achieve the freedom eventually. I'm going to call attention, though, to another 3 individuals who made a radical decision. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit got together and decided that they loved mankind so much. They love you so much that they would pledge their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to give us back that which we had lost because we had pledged allegiance to the wrong place. To win us back from the enemy of our souls. And so, in the middle of the war began in Eden. And the promise there was given, you will crush his head, but he will crush your heel. So it was that this conflict began, and this conflict lasted, but right in the middle of the battle, right in the middle of the war, there was this great declaration of freedom. Jesus came to give us freedom. He gave us life, liberty, and happiness. He said, the thief comes just to steal. The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly. I don't know what that means to you, but having been on the other side of life, before I found life in Jesus Christ, I can tell you that there is a vast difference between life and abundant life. Before I was a Christian, before I knew God, I was surviving. I was living. I had my little pleasures and I had my little issues. But nevertheless, when I found Christ, I discovered what I was living for, to have something to live for, to have something to look forward to really understand that God values us far more than we can understand. He values us. He's not a fool. He sees something in us that we can't see in ourselves. He believes in us. He couldn't have expressed it any more than to come and live like us and to die for us and with us and in our place. He came to give us life that is abundant, that is beyond what just survival is for most people. He gave us liberty to set us free. He set us, Luke 4:18, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because He has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who have been oppressed. We have been oppressed by sin. We have been oppressed by the devil. We have been oppressed by our fellow man. But God has come in the flesh to us to show us not only who God is, but who we really are. And so He came and He lived with us and He died for us. I've always thought it kind of ironic that in the document, the Declaration of Independence, It says that there is an inalienable right to life and to liberty, but there is only a right to the pursuit of happiness, not happiness itself. And I think that that is probably based on the perception that everybody is seeking for happiness in one way or another. It is built in us to seek happiness, and people seek it in all the wrong places. You know, they look for thrills. It's just amazing the way that people look for happiness in things, in power, in you name it. There's just every kind of substitute for the real happiness that God wants us to have. You know, the Beatitudes are something that Jesus began his teaching with. That is the first thing that, at least as far as Matthew's writings are concerned, was that he spoke. And, you know, the Beatitudes, I think, has kind of a wrong image because it says blessed and in various ways. But the word that was used, that Jesus used, was Macarius. Macarius is not blessed in the way that we usually think of blessed. We usually think of blessed as being pious or perhaps well regarded. But what Macarius means is happy. That's what it means. And that's the way it should have been translated, in my view. Nevertheless, you know, when you read it in that way, he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, "Happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Happy are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." What he's saying here is that you don't need to depend on circumstances or things to make you happy. Even when you're mourning, you can be happy in knowing that God is in control and that He will. Happiness is more than a transient feeling. Happiness is a principle that lives inside of you. Happiness is a source from which to draw when things go wrong. Happiness is something that only God can give you. All of those other things, you can get thrills, you can get feelings, you can get things, and you can get all those ideas that people have of what is happiness, but you can't find it out there. It's not out there, it's in here. The kingdom of God is within you, Jesus said. He said, "I want you to be happy." We are told to rejoice far more often than we are told to obey. We are told that that is the ideal for God's children. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Happy are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. I don't know, have you ever had this experience of wanting to be what Jesus wants you to be? You know, that feeling is something that God puts in you. That feeling is something that should make you extremely happy. You know, we all fall short of the glory of God. But even that can make us happy, because God will supply our every need. God will give us what we need, and He will build in us a desire And when God sees a desire in us, He counts it as an accomplishment. That is what the Declaration of Independence resulted in. When they expressed their desire for freedom, God saw to it that they received it. You know, the prescription for happiness is probably best stated by Paul in Philippians 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say, rejoice. Let your gentleness, it says here in the New King James, that's pretty poor rendition of what it says in the Greek. You can't always translate Greek into English. It just doesn't work sometimes, so they do the best they can. But what the word there that they translated gentleness is epieikos, which really means flexible strength, yieldingness, the strength under pressure, strength under stress. It is what a bridge needs in order to survive the elements. And let your gentleness be known to all men. The Lord is at hand. That should make us all happy. Be anxious for nothing. That's pretty easy to say. But it can become a reality with you as well if you leave everything in God's care. But in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And the peace of God that passes all understanding will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Do you want that peace for yourself? Amen. Brothers and sisters, we live in an unprecedented time in history. We live in a time when we need to make a declaration. We live in a time when our freedoms are being eroded. We are told that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. But we have watched as little by little our freedoms are being taken away. And there is on the horizon, it's been said in political circles that never let a serious crisis go to waste. What they mean by that is that gives them an opportunity to control. Now, control is the opposite of freedom. It is to restrict, to control, to suppress the individual. And that is what is happening in our society, is happening in our very own country. We see it happen day by day. We can get so used to it that we don't know when to jump. But the issue is very clear that God wants us to be ready. And such a time as it becomes necessary, we need to stand up and be counted. We were rapidly approaching a time when we're going to need to decide whether to surrender or stand firm in firm reliance on God. I'm looking for Patrick Henry's quote. I guess you know it. Is life so precious? Is peace so sweet as to be bought at the price of chains of slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what other course others may take. But as for me, give me liberty or give me death. I wonder today if you would like to pledge to God and to each other your lives, your fortunes, and your sacred honor. If you would, please stand as we sing God of our Fathers, number 645.